All right, this paper is a dialogue, and as I'm not schizophrenic, I brought along Jordan, who will be reading the part of Socrates. I'm Reilly, and I'll be reading Dante and narration. This is Evangeline, who will be reading Odysseus, and this is Kate, who will be reading The Knight from Canterbury Tales. On a barren cliff stood 4 men. Above them seethed the fiery coils of the inferno, and beyond, the shining rings of paradise. The murmur of their conversation mingled with the distant, infinite groans of the dance like gathered thunder, and the soft, soaring songs of the sage, like a light and longed-for rain. In the distance, a castle rose, proud and powerful, from the depths of its churning moat. From the opposite direction, a small huddle of slightly bewildered new arrivals tentatively approached the circle of men. A slender young woman, garbed in somber black, stepped forward and shyly inquired of the 4 where she might find the castle of Limbo. It would be our pleasure to direct you, Signora. I'm quite familiar with the area. I am Dante Alighieri, and many years ago,
we all had a book written about us, Dante. Take the poor woman to the castle. She just died in the name of Hades.
Oh, apologies, madame. Take my arm. I'm Knight of Chaucer at your service. The conversation intervention was provided by our resident Greek hero, the witty wanderer Odysseus. As he mentioned, hush, Dante. I'm perfectly capable of making the introductions. That is Dante, who occasionally is a lovely chap, if a bit vain and verbose. And this is Socrates, who, a renowned philosopher who occasionally has such an incessant barrage of unanswerable questions that we all want to drown him in the moat. Unfortunately, he's already dead. Welcome to Limbo, my dear.
As the knight concluded warmly, he took the woman's arm and made his way towards the castle, followed by the wondering, whispering group of newcomers. Dante flitted from man to woman, pointing out places and people of interest on their path, offering bits of advice and information, and managing to direct all of his monologues back to either his vast and venerable experience in all spheres of the divine, or his early infatuation with the enchanting Lady Beatrice. Odysseus followed close behind, holding a small and grinning boy on the broad shoulders of his bronze armor, simultaneously muttering ironic quips in response to Dante's verbiage, and solicitously making sure none of the new arrivals fell behind. Socrates traipsed in the rear, one hand distractedly clutching his dusty toga, the other gesticulating wildly as he held captive those walking beside him in enthusiastic debate. Finally, the group reached the moat. Dante, Socrates, Odysseus, and the knight watched as the crowd crossed, then turned towards the nearby meadow.
Ah, the recently deceased. How naive they are. Well, at least we could answer some of their questions.
I can answer all of their questions.
Yes, Dante, so we've noticed over the last few centuries.
You mentioned answering questions, Knight, which reminds me of a discussion I had a few days ago with that interesting thinker, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel.
If that name is any indication of the intensity of debate we're about to have, prepare yourselves for conversational battle, men.
Well, during our conversation, Hegel spoke of his idea of the phenomenology of spirit, essentially a continual process of thought building upon itself and expanding as it progresses through its historical and spiritual journey. He spoke of a dialectic, calling it the path of natural consciousness which presses forward to true knowledge, or as the way of the soul which journeys through the series of its own configurations. As he was explaining this phenomenology, this journey of thought, I realized that in the same way, the search for truth is also a pilgrimage, a phenomenology of questions. It is in the nature of every human to seek truth. However, this thirst for wisdom often mistakenly metamorphoses into a demand for the right answer. But following this phenomenology of questions, it is not only acceptable to be answerless, it is advantageous. If a man approached situations, conflict, and questions with a confidence of correctness, he would live in a state of constant pride and disengagement.
That sounds vaguely familiar, doesn't it, Dante?
Well, yes, of course. I know exactly what you're referring to.
As I was saying, Odysseus, in contrast, a search for truth through observation, conversation, and education would lead to profound ideas, wise men, thoughtful discussion, and fruitful experience. In your individual journeys, my friends, have you found this to be true?
Ah, indeed, Socrates. It is a pilgrimage, this phenomenology you speak of, that brings us to truth. Often men crave the resolution of a right answer found in a single algorithm or simple proof, when in fact what they should be seeking is truth, found in the rich education of an ongoing journey. I, for one, have found this truth to be complex and complicated at times, causing more question than it has quells. However, it brings a growth and gratification far more full than that of our surpassing distillation of the apparent right answer.
But Socrates, in my travels, so often when I asked a question, instead of getting an answer, I got more questions. How is a vague search for this truth you speak of superior to a clear and closed conclusion?
If I may, Socrates, I will answer Dante's complaint. And I swear by the gods not to mention the time I single-handedly annihilated the remainder of the Trojan army with a wooden horse.
A phenomenology is the study of phenomena, which is an education through experience. We would welcome any insight from your own personal pilgrimages.
But yes, my dear chap, the horse has been sufficiently beaten.
I swore. Anyway, I found that the most significant of my physical and philosophical journeys, the 10 years from the war in Troy to my home in Ithaca, there was one question that perpetually defined myself and my choices. This question was, what is honor? I sought honor in many forms. I looked to my constant courage in battle. My comrades said of me, no soldier took on so much, went through so much, achieved so much in battle and in bravery than Odysseus. I sought command and cunning in counsel. I was Odysseus, son of Laertes, known before all men for the study of crafty designs, and my fame went up to the heavens. I thought honor would be found in the victorious return at the war's end, shining armies in my triumphant wake. I believed for a time that the selfish seduction of an immortal woman would be an honor, and not a shallow, conceited boast. Honor was not to be found fully in one choice, one answer, one definition. I found it in returning to my son and my faithful wife, Penelope, who after 20 years of separation, loved me still and bestowed that precious honor on my name. I found honor in leaving the star-struck, sweaty exultation of marching at the head of a victorious troop to return to my little kingdom of Ithaca, living out my days in the wise and just rule of my people. But this honor was not a blatant glory. It was a journey, a pilgrimage that both provided answers, evidences and examples of true honor, and prompted questions. What is honor? There was no formula, no one answer to my universal inquiry. Instead, there was a journey that led me to more honor and truth than a simple answer ever could.
How did you come to any conclusion about what honor was when you reached no conclusion at all?
As a matter of fact, Hegel said something in answer to that particular question. He referring to the spirit that progresses upon its own journey, while we can translate that journey of spirit to our philosophical pilgrimage in search of truth. He said, the goal is the revelation of the depths of spirit, and this is the absolute conclusion, that the depth will not fully be revealed, so seek ever the revelation. The conclusion is to stop looking for a conclusion and to look for truth.
Questions are an expression, an extension of truth, and by actively asking them, we grasp for a tangible tendril of truth that is ever beyond our full comprehension. However, this does not give us leave to discount the validity of answers in their entirety. Without answers, we would have no beliefs to hold on to at all. Answers are not intrinsically amiss, yet we must be wary of settling for an incomplete conclusion. Instead of closing ourselves off to fuller and further truth by growing stagnant in the security of our answers, we should build upon the answers we have previously come to by continuing to ask questions. Answers found should spur us onwards on our journey to truth, not stop us partway.
Just as with any question, if you come to no complete conclusion, you will continue to ask more questions in the search of truth. And as you seek, you will continue to find not one right answer or a single conclusion, but a fuller understanding of what the truth is and how to live it out. I never found a definition of honor. Instead, I found honor itself. If I had contented myself with a definition I contrived, honor is bravery in battle, while in war plans, loyalty and love, I would have stopped searching for the truth and settled with something inferior to the abundance that true honor, found through a journey, holds. In the end, I was not asking the question, what is honor? that was only a tendril off the root. The question I was truly asking was, what is truth? And as I sought it, I found not a conclusion, but both honor and truth.
Will we find truth without finding a conclusion? We should ask without answer? How can this bring us to any sort of knowledge or wisdom or truth at all?
In the words of, oh, yes, myself, if you want to educate someone, confuse them. Things will become clearer soon, Dante, or rather, you will find truth as we ask more questions.
Well, I'm certainly confused.
By the gods, Dante does not have an answer. This is a shocking rarity.
Quiet, Odysseus. Can't you see the poor chap's head's about to explode? He doesn't know what to do with himself. And anyway, Socrates here looks like he has another theory to spring on us.
As a matter of fact, I do.
Today seems to be a day for shocking rarities.
While we are on the topic of education, I wonder, is this metaphor for the finding of truth, the journey, as valid for the abstract concepts of philosophy as it is for education itself?
You said earlier, Socrates, that a phenomenology is a study of phenomena, an education through experience. Once, years ago, I took a journey that proved more an education than any teacher with a textbook ever could.
Do tell, Knight.
I, along with 20-something other travelers, was on a pilgrimage to Canterbury to seek the holy blissful martyr. Among our party were gentlefolk and many walks and worldviews, a genteel nun, a brawny yeoman, a shrewd merchant, and many more. While we journeyed, we took turns, each telling a tale. Some told of princes, some told of peasants. Some were stories of valor and victory, and others were of dishonor and deceit. But no matter the subject, nor the speaker, the characters, nor the conclusion, like Odysseus, each journeyer asked a question. What is love? What is power? What is pride? The tales were told for good morality and general pleasure, and yet in each I found a depth of insight more profound than if we had exchanged proverbs or recited morals, in answer to the intrinsic questions themselves. The tales were a vehicle for truth, some guised in the belligerent drunkenness of the miller, and some in the absurd setting of the nun's priest. But in every fable, there were further questions that directed me towards the search for truth.
There is a point in which these incessant questions begin to bring forth abundant truth, instead of the uneasy dissatisfaction of a shallow answer, not only in moral, theological, and philosophical questions, but in every area, mathematics, medicine, marriage, mankind as a whole.
They do, indeed. But the path to that point is often wrought with uncertainty and unsettlement. So much so that many stop along the way to satisfy themselves with the complacency of an answer, held only to quell a query, and not to seek truth. However, if they persist in the pursuit of truth, the unsettlement settles into an understanding far higher than an answer, and yet never settles at all. Those who end in the smug stifling of a shallow answer are like a man who acquires a piece of precious artwork for the sole purpose of flaunting his wealth and feeding his arrogance, losing the beautiful reality of its true value in his conceit and false contentment. Then there is the man who sees the piece of art and appreciates its artistry in part, but is distracted by the fine tints and techniques, and still misses its true significance. He is those who question to an extent, glimpsing the profundity and the peace that is found in the complete pursuit of truth, but becoming caught up in the extension and not the entirety. But the man who sees and seeks beyond the tangible expression of the art, creating for himself a masterpiece, which he knows intimately and loves intensely, this man is like those who seek truth relentlessly, faithfully, completely. They do not create for themselves their own truth, but they never cease striving to find it. Truth is in itself something greater than we can ever fully comprehend, and therefore, to stop asking questions is to settle for something less than truth.
Then there is no peace in this pursuit. How can one ever be assured that he holds fast to the right answers when there is nothing to hold fast to? Only a shifting, shadowy being you speak of, elusive and evasive. This is truth?
A wise man once said, "Peace if possible, truth at all costs." Yes, we must believe the truth with our whole souls when we find it, and live in its light. But we will never fully find it. Instead, it is the yearning for deeper and higher truth, to know more completely, to see more clearly, that leads us to the wisdom to rest in, and yet to seek further still.
I must doubt when I cannot know. I do not understand how peace can come from this doubt, how truth is found where answers fall short, how a pilgrimage is more profitable than a conclusion.
Truth reveals itself to each of us when we at last realize how very little we understand about life, ourselves, and the world around us. Continue to question, Dante, for if you would be a real seeker after truth, it is necessary that at least once in your life you doubt, as far as possible, all things. This doubt you have is, at its core, your lack of a right answer, Dante, and this is what gives you pause and perplexity. But if you can believe that this doubt is itself your own pilgrimage to truth, peace will come.
I can try. The four fell silent, sitting pensively in the hazy sunshine of Limbo's meadow. Socrates held completely still, save the sporadic exclamation of his blue-veined hand or the furrow of his brow when a new question struck him. Odysseus slipped into the land of his memories, remembering the truth in his pilgrimages past. The night watched the few wanderers who skirted the quiet knoll, wondering at their stories and the education each of their journeys held. Dante sat, his head in his hands, wrestling desperately with the uncertainty in his mind and the truth in his soul. Each man sat looking, introspectively, retrospectively, and extrospectively, to the source of their individual truth. Socrates, a question. Odysseus, a memory. The night, a story. And Dante, his soul. At last, after a particularly forceful furrow, Socrates posed his last, truest question.
A good question is half of truth. But what is the other half? We are led to truth by a phenomenology of questions, a pilgrimage. But what is this truth we seek with such yearning? If we cannot settle at a conclusion, a right answer, then there must be something that transcends our worldly wisdom, a form higher than our self-made knowledge. We long for truth, but what is it in this truth that satisfies our souls?
I think I know. Socrates, your whole life you've asked questions in a persistent pursuit of truth. Yet, even from the height of your philosophical pilgrimage, you know there is something higher. You found so many tangents and traces of truth, but you never found its source. I was shown the source, but I was sightless behind the veil of my own nearsighted need for an answer, and I exchanged the peace of truth itself for my own shallow, shaky conclusions. You climbed and contended and contemplated the questions of truth, but mistook the part for the whole and was satisfied insufficiently as well. We both fell short of fullness, both settled for the shallow outskirts instead of continuing the climb to the center of truth. But Socrates, there is more than your questions, than my answers, than the journeys of Odysseus, than the stories of the night. In my lifetime, I was given the priceless chance to follow my pilgrimage of truth on an actual journey. I traveled through the inferno, purgatory, and finally to paradise, encountering men and women who were among these truth-seeking souls you spoke of, Socrates. I heard the tales and the truths of many lifetimes. I saw the joys of those who had found the truth and the pain of those who had not. I was led on a pilgrimage, but until now I could not see the truth that had led me onwards all along. Truth wheeled above me, displaying to me its eternal glories, and yet my eyes were only on the ground. I stood at his feet, in his presence, and his light shone on me, his light by which we are able to see all truth. For his light is truth, and he is the light. There is a source of truth, and this source is Christ.
How can something as eternally evasive as truth be shown to a finite man such as yourself, Dante?
If truth were the distant and unreachable entity you think it to be, Socrates, then it would be impossible to grasp or gain any part of it. But truth is accessible to us, ours for the taking, for the finding, for the knowing. Christ is the ultimate source of truth, and he is ours to take, to find, to know. Christ has revealed himself to us. The fullness of his presence is available and awaiting our pursuit. When we seek truth, we are knowingly or unknowingly seeking God. He reveals himself, and therefore his truth, by giving us the chance to be in relationship with him. Without him, we are capable only of glimpsing truth. We hold on to it with every bit of knowledge we possess, and yet the moment we become prideful and secure in our glimmer of truth, in our arrogance and our answers, it slips out of our grasp and we lose sight of it again. But when we seek truth that is found in Christ, we find a peace that surpasses all understanding and a truth beyond the shadows we strive to solidify alone.
How is truth revealed to us through a relationship with Christ?
When you fell in love with Penelope, Odysseus, you wanted to know her, yes? You asked question after question in an attempt to understand her, to be in genuine and open relationship with her, to find the truth of who she was in her soul. In the same way, when we pursue a relationship with the God who loves us, we come to know him, and we find the truth that we seek, that he is. He created us with the innate and intense longing for truth in his image. He created us with a God-shaped whole. He wanted us to seek truth and to find the truth we yearn for in closeness and communion with him. Just as we question truth, we question God when our circumstances confuse us or we cannot see the truth in the trial we are living through. In times of difficulty, God does not give us the answers to our questions, for that would distract us from our desperate and unending need for him, providing only an incomplete and insufficient guise for our God-shaped whole. Instead, he gives us himself, and in him the completed rest of peace and the continual revealing of truth.
Dante, on this journey we have just taken, this pilgrimage of the mind, you have found something true, have you not?
At last I have. A truth far more valid and valuable than any answer I found or flaunted on my own. A truth that both satisfies and spurs onwards my soul. A truth who saves.
And in finding this, my friend, all you have done is ask questions. In your doubt, your uncertainty, your refusal to settle for the answers your own understanding offered, and instead to seek the truth your soul demanded, you demonstrated the journey you doubted. In your questioning, you proved the phenomenology of questions. This conversation was your pilgrimage to truth, but in its very nature, just the beginning.
All my life, I believed that I was the source of my own truth. I held the finite answers I formulated to quell my questioning as infallible conclusions, and I believed that I could fill the God-shaped hole in my soul with the shallow knowledge I used to deflect my own doubts. But when I faced the questions I had stifled so long, instead of finding a terrifying truthlessness, I came face to face with the source of all truth, the God who satisfies the yearning in my soul for truth with his presence will lead me on this pilgrimage, this phenomenology of questions, ever to himself.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fitzpatrick. In your paper, you emphasize the necessity of questions in coming to truth and point towards the fact that being that the truth that we are going towards is a God is far beyond our comprehension, it should not be surprised if we end up with questions. However, throughout all sorts of areas of truth, statements, affirmations seem to be a huge part of what brings people to truth. The very Proverbs you mentioned in your paper is one statement after another. Heraclitus speaks again of statements, and these statements become the fodder that Socrates feeds upon in developing his philosophy. Euclid begins with 5 common notions, not questions, common notions, statements, affirmations. And it seems in many, many contexts that we come to knowledge through studying affirmations rather than simply looking at questions. Now, what is the role of statements of affirmation in our developing wisdom if, in fact, what we finally come to in our conclusion is simply questions?
There is absolutely nothing wrong with an answer. The problem is settling with an answer that's incomplete Because, like I wrote towards the middle of my paper, if you settle for one specific answer, that's not the fullness of a truth that you can't fully comprehend, because you can fully comprehend one answer. But if you come to a conclusion which is true, there are no conclusions that you come to that can lead you onwards to truth that aren't true themselves, unless you are asking questions in opposition to them. But if you settle for one answer, you're not going to open yourself up to the completion of truth, which will take you on a pilgrimage throughout your entire lifetime. Answers are important, and they're what we base our worldviews off of and how we make any statements whatsoever. But if we settle for those answers, then that's when we have a problem with settling for the confidence of our own correctness, the pride that we have all the knowledge and the wisdom and the truth that it takes to answer one specific question.
Not to be disrespectful, but it does seem to be exactly opposite the case is what is in fact true. If we take Euclid and we began by questioning Euclid's 5 common notions, that would be the problem. It does not seem we could get very far at all in geometry if we began by questioning the foundational truths. If we started to make an approach to theology that began by questioning whether the Bible was God's word, it would appear that we would be in great danger of very unfruitful progress. So how can we in fact come to knowledge, have fruitful, productive discussion without being willing to affirm specific truths?
Well, I'd like to point out the difference between questioning and a question. When you ask a question, you are searching for an answer. When you're questioning something, you're doubting the validity of an answer that's already been made. And so, say if you were questioning its truth. However, for your example with Euclid's common notions, questions had to be asked before those common notions were accepted as a common notion, because they had to be asked universally as something that was a common notion. And so the difference between questioning the validity of Euclid's common notions and asking questions which bring us to the common notions from which we can ask more questions, that are the propositions, I think is something that is an entirely different sphere of the use of the word question.
Well, taking it to the theological sphere, wherein obviously with God being far beyond our comprehension, we would expect to find questions. It is interesting to note that Protestants and Roman Catholics have all felt very comfortable giving statements of faith, lists of affirmations, not lists of questions. Curiously, the Orthodox tend to be very leery of such statements. You ask an Orthodox for a statement of faith, and they oftentimes don't have such a thing. They say we have our practice. They don't say we have a statement of faith. But assuming that statements of faith are a valid expression of the Christian life, you take something like the Nicene Creed, you have a whole list of affirmations. We believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. Would we come to wisdom in the progress of our Christian faith if we began not by affirming the creed, I believe, but by questioning each of those things? Do we believe in God the Father? Does He make heaven and earth? How much progress can we make in Christian life if we began with questions rather than affirmations?
Well, when you read the Nicene Creed for the first time, you can't automatically accept it as something that's true if you're following the path of the Bereans, because you have to question it. You say, is this true? Is it found in God's Word? Is this an affirmation that we can stand on, that we can live our lives from? And I think that we do have to come to answers and conclusions as we progress, because otherwise we're just going to be stuck in this unending flurry of questions, which we think could be answered when we get to heaven or in the beginning of eternity. And I think that we do have to come to conclusions on which we can build a life and a perspective and a worldview, but not settling for conclusions and not automatically accepting things that are spoon-fed us as this is what is true, by asking questions and saying, is this what God's Word says in the theological realm? Is this what I believe? Is this what I've seen to be true? Is this true? And by asking those questions, that's on which we build and accept the foundations that have already been built and we will continue to build, because otherwise there would be no progress as humanity as a whole if all we did was ask questions. We have to come to some sort of conclusion, because otherwise we're stuck, we're stagnant, we can't do anything. But in the same way, if we stay at those conclusions, we're also stuck and stagnant, and we can't do anything further on top of that. And so we have to continue to ask questions, along with building off of the questions that we've already answered, in order for us to do anything productive.
Now, you say that we cannot accept our conclusions without questioning them to be able to go on. Isn't the opposite true, that in order to continue to build upon those statements, we must take them as settled and continue to build on them, assuming that they are true, like we do with Euclid's common notions? In your paper, you say, therefore, to stop asking questions is to settle for something less than truth. You're quoting Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche also said that truth is a woman. Now, might I propose that his vision of woman is a fairly immature creature, fickle perhaps, it's always changing. And a more mature vision of womanhood would be to say that a woman comes to a point where she accepts realities and lives with them. She accepts that, yes, now I am a wife, now I am a mother, and she lives with those realities and builds upon them. She doesn't begin each day by saying, am I really married? Am I really a mother?
Right. I think that, again, like you said, if we always are questioning answers, then we're never going to make any progress. But I do think that it is wise to, before you take on an assumption, to question it, and not just to take it blindly as something that people you trust have told you, or that's very universally recognized as true. I think that it is indeed really, really good for your moral, theological, philosophical health to ask questions and to not just accept the common notions as, okay, it's printed in a book which a lot of people have read, therefore it must be true. But if you think about a common notion, you're going to come to the conclusion that this is true. The whole cannot be greater than the part. And so you're going to come to the conclusion that it's true, from which you can build on the proposition's further questions. So I don't think it's a wake up every morning and, oh, let's re-question my worldview again. I think it's once we've come to an answer, you can continue to build on that by more and different questions.
Thank you very much. Other questions?
Hannah.
It's lovely. It's so delightful to have a whole group up there. I was wondering about, well, I was thinking about the book The Great Divorce, and there's a character that's constantly questioning, and in The Great Divorce they all meet up with someone that sort of sets them straight, and this like angel person that sets this man straight says that as a child you knew that questions, the purpose of questions is answers, and you knew that that was the end goal, because now you're just obsessed with questions, you just keep asking them. And you think about childlikeness and the fact that children are pretty well known for accepting things. You know, they accept that their parents will take care of them, so they don't live in fear all the time. They accept that they'll be fed. They accept that, you know, the car will take them. They just accept things. And Christ exhorts us to be like children. And so I was just wondering, is childlike faith that we're exhorted to have in the Bible, is that possible with this much questioning? Would it be possible for, you know, Abraham to have been the man of faith he was if he had to ask God a billion questions about, you know, where was the promised land and when will I get it, and, you know, who else will be inheritor with me? He just went, and, you know, along with everyone else in Hebrews 11. So I'm just wondering, how does that work, having faith, if we're asking all these questions?
I definitely do not think that faith like a child is at an opposition to asking continual questions in the search of truth. I think that the reason that a child will accept that he's going to be fed in the morning is because he has found it true that every day hence he has been fed in the morning, and so that's true. And so accepting things with faith like a child is not at odds with asking questions. Those are just questions that have been answered already, and that so we've established that answer to build on and progress, so we can continue to ask questions that are perhaps a little bit more complex, like what am I going to eat for breakfast this morning? And so I think that it's definitely not something in which you have to separate, oh, the search for truth is very different from the life of faith, because both of them are aimed towards the goal of finding Christ, who is truth and the object of our faith. And so when we ask questions, we're looking for Christ, not questioning Christ. We're actually asking questions to know Christ. And I think that in order to do that, Abraham did ask questions. Like, if I was Abraham and I just accepted those shocking commands that God gave me to sacrifice my only son, I would question and I would doubt. But he did it anyway, and that was the true mark of his faith. Not his lack of questions, but his acting despite his questions. And so I think that you can most certainly have both of them together, and that is what I think is not the entirety of, but brings up a big portion of how you live a life that is aimed towards Christ as its center point. Olivia?
Very pretty, very pretty. We talked in the Lord in towards the end when Andrew was dying. he and Natasha are having their sweet moment, and he's talking about love, and you bring this sort of up, and you give the way Odysseus asks, how is truth revealed to us through a relationship with Christ? And Dante goes on to talk about how when Odysseus fell in love with Penelope, he wanted to know her. And so when we were reading one piece, we talked about is loving someone and knowing them, and when you love someone, you want to get to know them, or is knowing someone loving them, and vice versa. So, and we have this term that we refer to as true love. So, would you consider, and this is not a person, this is not God, this is a person, a relationship between two people we're talking about here. So, is there such a thing as true or truth love, as you are referring to truth here as a constantly, something that we constantly strive for? Is it possible to have true love for someone if we are always looking to know them more, and if there's always more to know about them?
I think love is actually a really beautiful metaphor for truth, in that if you love someone, you can fall in love with someone, you can find your common notion to begin your search for truth on, but you continue to ask questions to get to know them and to love them more fully, because the extent of your love there's no boundaries on your love. You can't say, oh, I've been friends with you for 5 years now I can't know you any better than I already know you, and oh, that's it, Olivia, we're done. And so we have to keep asking questions to get to know each other better, just like we ask questions to know Christ better, and that's what the Bible is for, is to not to answer our questions, but to give us more questions, to seek Christ, and that is the object of our search for truth. Just in the same way, when you fall in love with someone, to continue to love them, to be in true love with them, you want to know them, you want to ask questions incessantly and continually and eternally.
Is truth absolute?
Yes. Christ is absolute, therefore truth is absolute.
Then how is it that we can never completely comprehend truth?
Because if God is truth, and we are striving to understand something that is outside of our range of understanding, we as finite humans cannot fully comprehend God. And therefore, since God is truth, we cannot fully comprehend truth. We can glimpse a part of it. God can reveal his truth to us, but we have to be in continual search for that truth in order not to just stop and say, oh, I have found the truth, therefore I found God, now I'm on an equal level with God because I can fully comprehend him. And so in order for us to fully understand an absolute truth, we can't. We have to keep asking to fully understand an incomprehensible God.
Then, can I use the Bible?
Yes.
Okay. So in 1 Corinthians 13, where it talks about now we live in an imperfect and we only have parts, like we're saying. But when perfection comes, the imperfect disappears. Now we know in part, then we shall know fully. Is there any extent, will there be a time when we can fully comprehend truth?
Well, I'm not God, so I don't know the answer to that question fully, but I think that as we're in the presence of God, his truth is going to be really blatantly revealed to us, because that's what the angels do. They're singing his praises because they're in the presence of someone who is truth, who is beauty, who is justice personified. And so I think that, I'm not sure, from my initial reaction, I would say yes. Yes, we will be able to continually be asking questions throughout eternity to know God, because he is so unknowable that we as finite humans can't know him fully, but not being God, which essentially proves my point. Oh, I don't know the answer to that question.
One more?
Yeah.
What do questions always lead us to truth?
No, definitely not. You can ask a question of a faulty source. You can come up with a faulty conclusion. The Latin phrase that Euclid uses when he comes up at a... Thank you. You can end up at a faulty conclusion which isn't true just by asking questions. Questions do not necessarily mean that you're going to end up at something true. However, if you don't ask questions, you're definitely not going to end up at something true. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. David.
Hey, good job on your paper. That was awesome. That was fun with the 4 people. I think, I was wondering, was Evangeline typecast as Odysseus? Real question.
No, is the safe answer to that question.
What's the honest answer?
No.
No, the question mark?
It's a definite no, but it's certainly fit well, so.
So, and along that line, Evangeline had a line that I thought was very funny. She said that she didn't know the definition to a word, honor, and do you care to comment about that?
That was intentional.
Oh, that was intentional, so she would, from her own mouth, was it say that she didn't know the definition of honor?
Well,
Was that the point of that line?
you can have a definition, but in the context that I was using it, definition was a full understanding of the truth of the question, what is honor, so you can't have a definition for that. I agree that you can have a definition to a lot of words and some statements, and so I'm not making her a heretic by her own doing, but yeah. McKenna.
One part where you were talking about, this kind of goes along with the idea of absolute truth, which is, as you said, God. But you said a part, often men crave the resolution of a right answer found in a single algorithm or simple truth. And in fact, what they should be seeking is truth found in a rich education and ongoing journey. So you present like this juxtaposition of the journey versus like solid proof idea. But aren't there certain algorithms or proofs that can see truth, that can involve truth, and not necessarily just something that's this ongoing process?
Yeah, I think that the difference between that is if we as humans, we like right answers, because once we come up with the right answer, we can stop thinking about it, and that's a lot easier than continuing to ask questions. So there are definitely a time and a place, and a very good time and place for right answer. For example, when I'm solving a math problem on the SAT, I wouldn't like to keep asking questions towards the pursuit of truth for what's the answer to my math problem. I'd like to get going. So there is a time and a place for a right answer, but on that right answer that we came to, we can build other mathematical proofs. We can ask further questions on how this would display itself in the natural world, or what other problems can be solved in a similar fashion. You can continue to ask questions off a conclusion that you've already reached and can live upon. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay. Mackenzie.
Kind of a little bit off of what Hannah was asking, but kind of flipping that, would you say that you would be able to have the faith and seek after God without asking questions?
I think that to seek after is in itself, when you're seeking after something, you ask questions, because that is in itself what seeking a search is. But so I think that in order to receive salvation, we have to ask the question, why do I need salvation? Because otherwise you will be accepting it for no reason other than a lot of the people I know are so-called Christians, or it's been presented to me in a winsome fashion, which would still involve questions, answering questions. And so I think that in order to seek God and to seek truth, we do have to ask even the most fundamental of questions in order to get started, get it going in any sort of direction towards Christ. Emma.
Lovely job, Reilly. It was so much fun and so encouraging to listen to. You were talking about earlier with Mr. Hendricks how when humans have assumptions, they first come to those assumptions by questioning them. My question is, whenever they question those assumptions and they find answers, those answers have to be based on something even lower than the assumptions. And so is there a time whenever we question, where we can't question that assumption anymore? There has to be a place where we just take it as it is.
There's a lot of directions you could go with that. Could you give me an example?
Can I give an example?
Yeah.
Law of non-contradiction.
Okay.
Two things cannot be simultaneously opposites, and at the same time, Aristotle says you can't question the law of non-contradiction. All right, you just can't. If you do that, you destroy all basis for further discourse. Is there anything else that you would say besides the law of non-contradiction that is unquestionable? God is the maker of the world. Unquestionable or questionable?
I think that you can most certainly question God as the maker of the world, but if you're asking questions with the true intent of, I want to find out the truth of this question, you're going to end up with God is the maker of the world, because God has created us with the God-shaped whole and created to reflect His glory, so that when we ask questions, we're going to find God, not in his full nature, because like we talked about earlier, you can't know God in his full nature, being a finite human. But no matter where you start, you're going to end up with questions which build upon conclusions, which then prompt more questions and continue going towards Christ. That's a lot easier to pinpoint in moral, theological, philosophical realms. It's more difficult if you're saying, say, a science experiment. But I think that, yeah, you can move forward to Christ. Was your question more of if you question the assumption that was asked by a question, was asked by assumption, do you go backwards to Christ? Or is there an assumption that you finally get to that can't be questioned, like the law of non-contradiction? Was that what you're asking? Okay, I think that goes into an entirely different sphere of the whole discussion with the law of non-contradiction. How do you know something is true, like a common notion, just because it feels right and feels true? I think that that has a lot of parts to its answer, but I think that by questioning, we also gain a much fuller understanding of an assumption that we may be stating as our own without fully realizing the implications of. And so if we make a statement and then we go back and question the assumption that prompted that statement, and then we question the assumption that prompted that assumption, we'll have a much fuller understanding of what we were saying or what someone else was saying. Just like we ask questions in regards to the great books, we get a much fuller understanding of what the authors are trying to express in the great books than if we just accept it at face value without discussing it and without thinking about the ideas that they're presenting. As for the law of non-contradiction, I think that is an extent in which if you ask a question, you're going to end up with, why do I feel like this is right and non-contradictory? Because there is an extent to questions, I think, in that direction, just like there isn't an extent on there is Christ, which is a conclusion, but we're never going to reach that conclusion because we are finite humans. I think in the same way, we can go backwards and say we're never going to reach that fundamental assumption that the law of non-contradiction is founded upon. Does that answer your question? Oh, Mr. H.
Yes. Also, René Descartes argued in the Discourse on Method that the existence of God cannot be questioned. You have to accept it. And it's for reasons similar to the law of non-contradiction. If you do not begin by assuming that God has created the world, you don't know what created you. If you don't know what created you, you have no reason to assume that the cogitations of your own mind lead you towards truth rather than complete fantasy. So, is the existence of God, would you agree with Descartes that the existence of God fundamentally cannot be questioned? As questioning that destroys all the basis for logical thought.
I would not agree with Descartes when he says that, because I think that in order for us as Christians and potential Christians, in order for us to receive that salvation, there has to be a question. And when you question your own morality or your own intrinsic goodness or whether God exists, that is what prompts the search for a God who may or may not exist. And you can arrive at conclusions as you continue to go, and from then say, I have looked around me and I've looked at the people around me and I have concluded that God exists because he is evident. And I think that that's where I took my questioning more in a search for Christ direction than perhaps Descartes did, because he was my search for truth through Christ is based off the assumption that we want to know Christ, whereas Descartes is, does God exist? And I think that with either, they can be questioned, but you're going to go about them in a different way than, say, if I was getting to know Olivia, than if I was questioning if God exists. And so, does that answer that portion of your question?
Yes, it makes me ask another question. Abraham leaves Ur of the Chaldees, and he has faith in the Lord, and it is credited to him as righteousness. Abraham is seen as the father of the faithful. Now, if Christians and those who are children of Abraham are defined by faith, what is the role of questioning in that, as faith usually seems to be affirming rather than questioning a truth?
I think I said earlier in response to Olivia's question that faith isn't a lack of questions, it's acting, trusting the one who gave you the capacity to question. And I think that acting in faith is not at all at odds with asking questions. And I think that when you come to the point at which you say, I don't know the answer to these questions because I'm not God, so I'm going to trust God, that's faith. And I think that that's how that plays itself out in the life of Abraham.
Thank you very much. Further questions?
Grandpa.
Yeah.
First of all, hats off to you. To be
You
here.
still have yours on. But
Didn't say it was a chapel. Anyway, to sit amongst young people and hear this question, awesome. As I understand it, faith is what you need to know God. Without faith, you can't know Him. Does that mean there's no questions? What happens when your marriage is breaking up? Your child dies. You lose your job. All of that stuff happens. Do you question faith? Yes, you do. You question it all the time. You ask questions. But if you have true faith, you know that you serve a sufficient God that will answer all of those questions all of the time. You don't get to pick. You don't get to pick and choose when He's sufficient. He's sufficient for everything. So, my question to you is, the definition of faith does not preclude asking questions. Is that correct or incorrect?
I think that faith is something that picks up where questions fail. Because there is an extent at which, no matter how much we question, we're not going to come up with an answer that satisfies the God-shaped hole in our soul without God. And that is faith, because we have to trust the God that prompts the questions in us. And when we trust that God, we act in faith based off of a journey of our questions that led to that. And I think that having faith doesn't mean we can't ask questions, but having faith does mean we trust God with questions we can't answer.
Jordan. So we talked last year about using questions as a tool for finding truth. But you also said, I think it might have been one of Kate's lines in there, that the question itself is an extension of truth. So I guess my question would be, what exactly does that mean?
And just like you would not be able to move at all without having assumptions or having conclusions that you can base your life upon, the same way questions are an extension of truth by looking, I believe it was Odysseus or Evangeline's line that said, I wasn't asking the question, what is honor? I was asking, what is truth? And truth is Christ. Essentially, when you ask a question, you're looking for Christ. And so, in that way, questions are an extension of truth, and they're also the foundation on which we seek truth further. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have feasted on words, we have been good verbivores, and now it's time for some carnivores, as we do have some good stuff cooking up on the barbecue over there. That's easy for a second. And just remember, once again, we usually do have leftovers at lunch. We'll put those out at dinner time, if you'd like to have those. And we are coming back at 2 o'clock. We'll meet right by the bell at 2 o'clock, and we will walk to the park together. And I'll say it a number of times. While we're walking to the park, we all need to stay on the same side of the road. We are going to be walking down a real live road, all right? So, all stay on the far side of Oak Lane while we're walking down so that we give the cars one side to pass. Please don't walk in the middle of the road. Try to stay to the side. All right. Also, today during lunch, I need the cell phone. And so if you can get that and meet me at the end of the table with that cell phone, so I can do it. Today during lunch, I'm going to do a time lapse of our cable getting eaten up. So it should be kind of fun to watch. So you'll see a little camera down there on a tripod. Please don't bump into it as it'll mess it up. So, Ms. Hendricks, you have something to say?
I do. We have some parking problems. there's a gravel section on our neighbor's driveway, and people have parked in the line, so they're blocking each other, and it's not using the space efficiently. But if we get people repark so that they're, instead of being parked going that way, parked like this at a diagonal, we can fit twice as many cars there.
Yeah, let me just show up here.
Okay,
Wait, can I just show
Sure.
just step aside. So here is the gravel parking area, all right? So you can drive up my neighbor's gravel parking area. Please do not park in a line parked parallel with one another like that, all right? So if you know that you're parked over there, please have your parents reshuffle their cars if you would, please.
And face the little slope that goes up.
Yeah,
Instead of
head
facing
into the slope.
And then also there are people parked on the left side of the driveway by our neighbor's mailbox and beyond that, and we don't need, people can't park on that side. We need to keep that area clear for our neighbors. So there's about 5 cars that are parked beyond the mailbox and in front of the mailbox. I think someone with those Zusa Pacific stickers all over their Camry is, or I think I know who it is. I was going to give her a new folder. But I can't find
He's run away already.
So I'll track her. Anyway, oh, she's there. I mean, George. Anyway, so, and there was apparently a problem during the potluck yesterday. I don't think it was the students so much, but it was younger children that were getting seconds and thirds before students had gotten first serving. So if you see little people cutting in line, maybe gently remind them that, oh, you had your first serving already. Why don't you get to the end of the line so I can have my first serving? And they'll listen, because they're big kids, right?
Also, little kids need to go through with their parents, right?
Little kids need to go through.
Yeah, the parents, your little kids need to go through with you, all right? So please don't just let them go through the line. Also, I do have, today I will be the Greek checker today, and I do have more Greek cards that I give out to those of you who lost yours, but at the end of the line. This is a little motivation, a little purgatory. Zane, I'm not done yet. You sit down. I'm being a bad boy. Oh, all right. Okay.